Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you join us from. A really warm welcome at this webinar, A Circular Future for the European Machinery and Equipment Industry. A mouthful, but we're really happy to discuss with the audience, with our engaging panelists today, this very crucial topic. And we're really happy that you're joining us today. My name is Mark de Wit. I'm Director of Business Engagement at Circle Economy. We are an impact organization with about 60 people from Amsterdam, and we work with businesses, with cities, with national governments to become practical about what that transition to a circular economy means. And I think it's an important topic that we're discussing today. Just coming out of the Egypt COP last week, where I think there are mixed messages in terms of what our takeaways are. But one thing is for certain, time is of the essence. We need to move fast. And definitely the element of manufacturing industry in terms of the equipment, the machinery we use is a central element of making the world economy go round, making it flourish, but also puts a very heavy element on the material that we use for producing and manufacturing those products, as well as causing emissions. So I'm thrilled to talk about that topic in a little while with our panelists, our industry experts. But before we do that, I would like to kick us off on a high level and really see kind of what is the urgency that we're facing at the moment. So if you can go to the next slide, maybe I can quickly walk you through the program that we have today. So we have about an hour, a packed hour ahead of us. So as I said, I'll quickly set the scene, then I'll transition to my dear colleague, Tamara Veldboer, who's gonna introduce the panelists and really guide the panel discussion with us today. We're very happy to take your questions in the Q&A part while we're talking already now, but we would like to kind of carve out some time towards the end of the session today to really specifically address those questions and really have an engaging discussion with the audience before we close at 11:45 CET here. So that will be our program. If you can go to the next slide, what I really wanted to touch on first is some of the challenges that we are faced with, both in terms of the business practice at the moment, but also in terms of our personal lives. Coming out of a situation of global lockdown for almost 2 years, the situation currently in Ukraine, unparalleled and record inflation numbers, very high energy prices are really putting a pressure on the manufacturing industries. Whether it is about kind of the raw material prices, whether it's about, as you see in this picture, kind of the logistics, making sure that we can have things at the right place at the right time. We've, for example, seen a microchip shortage just come out of a COVID situation, which means that we couldn't keep the production of automobiles intact, and there still are delivery issues until the very day. So we see that this situation have really put a magnifying glass on some of the unresilient elements and the cracks in our economic system, but really have surfaced those issues to a large extent. So that's really some of the situations we're coming out of and that we're faced with today, and we'll see what that means in actual practice for the sector that we're going to look at. But if you go to the next slide, one of the outcomes of this, and this of course has been front and central to the situation that we have seen in Egypt last week, is we are currently living in a world that's 1.1 degree warmer than we started 200 years ago. And we've seen what that means. The floods recently in Pakistan, the droughts that we are confronted with, extremely dry summers, forest fires, as you see in this picture. So really we are confronted with that world, and it really puts the urgency of the matter kind of front and central to where we stand today. And what we strongly believe in, and what I would like to share with you, is some of the insights and some of the analysis that we have conducted on the global scale, which we bring out yearly at Davos, which is our circularity gap report. So if you go to the next slide, what we try to look at there is what is the material footprint and the material use related to satisfying basic human needs. And if you go one slide further, what I want to highlight here is that we consume about 100 billion tons of materials every year to fuel our economy. And one slide further shows that we're doing that really to satisfy 7 basic human needs, from housing, from mobility, to healthcare, to nutrition. And interestingly enough, somewhere in the center of this diagram, so in this kind of colorful spaghetti, is the manufacturing industry. So it is about the manufacturing of automobiles, of cars, as we'll start to discuss on offshore wind turbines, of kind of heating installations. So there is an array of different products that we manufacture, sourcing materials on the one side, providing basic human needs on the other side. And it's a crucial element of our economy that is incredibly material intensive as well. So if you go to the next slide, what we focus on in this analysis as well is what happens with those materials once we have stopped using them. And you see that there is a huge portion being emitted in the form of carbon dioxide. A huge portion is being dispersed, for example, plastic that drifts in our oceans and ends up as plastic soup. There is about a third of all of these materials are used to fuel our economic growth, to be more prosperous with more people on this planet, so is added to stock. About a third is actually wasted, of which the majority is lost through landfill, through incineration, and about 1/10 of everything actually makes it back into our economic system. So you could say that our current global economy is 9% circular. Now, if you go to the next slide, what is more interesting than dwelling too long on the grim situation we're in is to looking at where the solution space is. And over a year ago, we created this overview. And interestingly enough, you see that across mobility, across housing, which is in blue here, across the green, which is nutrition, there are many different machinery and equipment categories that we need to supply those. And we see that there are crucial solutions in all of those sectors across the manufacturing industries to put us on a pathway that is compatible with Paris, and where the circular economy really provides a unique opportunity to do better and to really future-proof those sectors. Now, if you go to the next slide, what we want to do for today is actually double-click on specific sectors and then also specific to the European context. We just had a very engaging discussion on the automotive sector in Europe just an hour before this webinar. We'll have one on the built environment in 3 hours from now, so you're more than welcome to also join that one. But for today, we really want to double click on that machinery and equipment sector. So with that, I would love to hand over to my dear colleague, Tamara, to guide us through some of the outcomes of the report and also introduce us to the panelists today and take it forward. So Tamara, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mark, and welcome everyone. I'm going to take the next 5 minutes or so to breeze through our analysis for the European machinery and equipment industry and what key strategies can be applied to increase circularity in this very diverse sector. Now, as you can read all the details and examples included in the report offline, I will go through rather fast so that we can move to our panelists and learn from their real life experience. Now, what the report does, it illustrates 5 circular strategies using 2 examples, because as said, the machinery and equipment industry is rather broad, ranging from MRI scanners to agricultural equipment. And what we have used in the report is a focus on wind turbines, where we illustrate product-related strategies, and industrial water pumps, which have a focus on business model related strategies. Now, since each have their different characteristics and challenges, they also share in common that they are often material and energy intensive sectors and are dependent on scarce and valuable materials. Now, if you go to the next slide, thank you. In the report, we have created this overview of the wind turbine sector, which has a vital role to play in the renewable energy transition. Yet our analysis has shown that it's only around 30% circular today. Now, this number includes all the materials used for production, so in the top left corner, all the way to use and disposal, both for onshore and offshore wind capacity. And even though the recycling rates can be quite high at around 64% currently, the levels of recycled content flowing into the construction of new wind turbines remains relatively low at around 29%. And another challenge that is faced by this sector is that some elements currently are largely unrecyclable. And here you can think of blades and magnets. Now, what our analysis has shown on the next slide, I will introduce a few of the highlights. Now, one is that because the industry is still relatively nascent and is focusing on building up its capacity at this point, which you can see via the large amount of inflows, which is around 3.9 million tons of materials that go into the new build and repowering of wind turbines. And that compares to only a small fraction of outflows that comes available right now through decommissioning of wind turbines at only 90 kilotons. Then the second insight, which is also related to the buildup of capacity, but then focusing on let's say the gigawatts that are powered through these turbines, so to say, where new wind turbines, the buildup is around 13.5 gigawatts. And also here, there's only 0.9 gigawatts of repowering in the industry at this point in time. Now, the focus over the longer term, and here you should really think beyond 2040, the focus should shift towards repowering and repurposing of new builds, over new builds. Now, if you click on to the next slide, the third insight that I would like to highlight, and which I also briefly touched upon when I introduced the 30% circularity, is that only 64% of materials from decommissioned turbines currently are recycled. Now, still that the overall circularity only is stuck at 30% is due to the high share of virgin materials versus recycled input from other markets. Now, if you go to the next slide, we will look towards the future and the potential of the industry. And what our analysis shows is that by 2040, the wind turbine industry has the potential to increase its overall circularity to 50%. So that is an increase of 20% by 2040 by pulling 4 key levers. Now, our analysis shows that each lever on its own may have a limited impact on circularity. However, if you combine it, it has this increased impact. Now, if you can go to the next slides, you can see. Sorry, one moment. What you can see is that the first circular strategy that we highlight focus on the inflow side. So what can you do in the design or manufacturing stages of the product life cycle? And the first strategy looks at the potential of increasing the recycled content, which is 29% today, to 45% in 2040, which can be driven by large material flows such as steel and concrete, but also the lower volume materials like cables or fiberglass. And this can boost the circularity of the industry by close to 10%. And the additional benefits that using greener alternatives as material inflows will also have the opportunity to reduce the carbon intensity associated with production. Now, the second strategy focuses on the role of design, which is important in any circular transition and in any sector, since it enables the lifetime extension and across the board improves the end of use options for products. Now, if you apply modular efficiency in the design of wind turbines, this provides an opportunity to use fewer raw materials to respond to the still rising energy demands. And this will enable the efficiency of the wind turbine stock to increase from 3.5 megawatts per million ton of raw material to 3.8 megawatts. And this can boost the circularity close to another 4%. And also here, there's the potential of less greenhouse gas emissions because we will need fewer materials. On the financial side, less material weight might increase the profitability of wind turbine manufacturers. Now, two more strategies that we want to highlight. The third one focusing on repowering, remanufacturing, and repurposing of existing stock. So this focuses on utilizing the existing infrastructure and, for example, only replacing turbine blades and generators. And if you do that also with components that have increased efficiency or larger capacity, then you can generate more electricity with less wind turbines. This has the potential to extend the lifetime of products that are already there and thereby reduce the carbon footprints. And the circularity increase is estimated to be around 3.5%. Then the last one, increasing recyclability. The analysis shows that boosting the recyclability both of existing and new components increases the recovery and recycling of materials from decommissioned turbines. And on average, we have estimated that the recycling rate could jump from 64% to 92% across all material groups. This would then lead to an increase in circularity of another 3%. And then on the greenhouse gas side, there's the potential to reduce emissions associated with landfilling. And on the financial side, there might be a potential price premium on recycling blades. Now, all these different circular solutions should be prioritized based on the characteristics and challenges in the various machinery and equipment subsectors. So I will now turn to our panelists to open the conversation and let them share their thoughts and experiences on how to move these industries forward. So on the panel with me today are Giuseppe Della Greca from Enel and Harry Morrison from Bain. Giuseppe is currently working in the Sustainability Initiatives and Circular Economy team in Enel Group. And among his activities is that of defining the group strategy on the circular economy and supporting business units in initiatives on the subject. Moreover, Giuseppe identifies and spreads opportunities related to the circular economy and leverages external collaborations and develops best practices, tools, and metrics on the topic. Welcome, Giuseppe. And Harry. Harry is a partner in the sustainability and responsibility practice at Bain and leads the work there on circularity, from research to strategy development. His experience and expertise includes leading sustainability-focused transitions, and he has deep knowledge on decarbonization and circular business models in the broadest sense. But also he has experience developing circular strategies for the manufacturing sector. So welcome both. I'm excited to explore with you more specific and circular solutions in the industry that you're both well versed in. So starting with you, Giuseppe, can you please share with us what is Enel's vision to accelerate the transition to circularity in the energy sector? And can you illustrate how you are turning this vision into reality with some of the main initiatives that you're carrying out?
Thank you, Tamara, and good morning to everyone. Yes, circular economy is a very important topic for us. In our journey towards a sustainable and circular business model, we started with a strong focus on the penetration of renewable energy in order to address, for example, the emission related to the resources used for energy production, as coal and gas. The circular economy applied to our asset was fundamental to complete this picture in order to address also our scope 3 emissions that are related to the machinery that we use for energy production and distribution. And in our strategy, circular economy is a fundamental contribution to our net zero path that at 2040 include also the scope 3 emission and not only 1 and 2. In our vision, circular economy is not only related to environmental impact, but is also an opportunity to make our business model more competitive from an economical point of view, and also more resilient in order to address some issue related to geopolitical risk, price risk of the material that are used in our asset. So in order to solve this issue and make our business model more circular, we are currently acting in different areas. Generally, it's fundamental to work on different circular business models. So starting from the input phase, the use phase, and end of life phase. In general, we are working mainly in 2 directions. So from one side, for the new asset that we are installing and we will install in the future, in that case, the design is the key element in order to create from the beginning this kind of asset more circular. But at the same time, we need also to work on the new solution for the end of life in order to manage in a more circular way the asset that we installed 10 or 20 years ago. So we are working on several projects that are covering all these areas. So, for example, if we consider the new asset that we are installing, where we have more levels at design phase, for example, about the photovoltaics, we are extending our factory that will become the biggest gigafactory in Europe for photovoltaics. And here we are evaluating, for example, the possibility to use recycled material instead of virgin one. So, for example, recycled plastic instead of glass. In other assets, like wind turbine, for example, where in this case we don't produce, but we buy it from our supplier, but we are also co-innovating with them and startups evaluating new solution, for example, material for the blades or wind turbine, tower-based infrastructure, or for other assets like storage, we are also evaluating alternatives to the chemical storage. So, for example, the thermal storage that use rocks instead of lithium and this kind of material, gravitational storage. Then, if we consider the existing asset, we have some life extension project that in order to cover the use phase of our asset, an example is related to the reuse of battery from the automotive system as a stationary storage system that we can combine with our production facilities. And if we consider the end of life phase, so the asset that we are decommissioning now, but especially in the future, because generally in our case, we have most of the more volume of wind PV we will have after 2040 or 2040 and something in the 2030. But we are already working to improve the technology, for example, for the recycling of wind blades. So now we actually are implementing 2 facilities for recycling, one in Spain, another in Italy, that will recycle the blades, and the same with batteries, and the same with PV. We are participating in a European funded project, Proporama, to develop a technology that can recycle also precious material for PV. So in our vision, it's important to explore several solutions, and the key element is the collaboration of all of these with startups, with original equipment manufacturer, and so on.
Well, I'm really impressed by the breadth of strategies and initiatives that you're pursuing as a company. You can really tell that you're working indeed all across the board as you're sharing from design to end of use. That's yeah, as said, quite impressive. So, Harry, would you say that this is representative for the sector more broadly? What kind of opportunities do you see, and what is the uptake of these opportunities, considering the different dynamics in the subsectors of this industry?
Yeah, thanks, Tamara. Look, great to be here, and really exciting to hear about the broad range of activities at NL. I think there's a couple of things that Giuseppe said that are quite representative. The first thing is that the launch point was very much a sustainability motivation and making the company's own operations lower carbon and more sustainable. And that's quite common. We did a survey earlier this year at Bain, and we discovered that the number one motivation actually for companies to explore circular economy right now is sustainability. It's about 2/3 of respondents said that was the number one topic. Now, that's a great starting point, and of course, seeing all those end-to-end strategies is really important. What's interesting is that the second sort of motivation is then a more commercial one. Very often, it's about the opportunity to change the dynamic with customers, to sell differently, and to shift the business model potentially. And so we often see these two things going hand in hand, kind of making your own operations more sustainable, but exploring circularity in the marketplace as well. Now, the mix of circular strategies tends to vary quite a lot by subsector. And I think you touched on that, Tamara. You know, it's important to consider whether the assets and the equipment and machinery we're talking about is very long life, or is it rather short life? Is it very valuable? Is it less valuable? Is it an industry where there's a lot of innovation or not? And all of these different characteristics will kind of condition the extent to which some circular strategies like reuse or refurbishment, remanufacturing are really viable or not, or whether you're much more in a world of simply looking to recycle goods at the end of their life. And, you know, as we saw with the wind turbine, it's a long life asset, it's quite high tech, it's quite challenging materials. And so really it's about designing it right. And then it's about finding solutions for recycling. Very, very different to a short life piece of equipment. You know, if I look at my laptop sitting here, it's maybe going to work for a few years. I'll probably upgrade it. Actually, there's huge potential there, though, for it to be refurbished, for it to be repurposed, you know, sold a second time, used by a second user. And so some of those other circular strategies, the smaller loops, if you like, as part of the use phase, can be very addressable for a different type of equipment. And so I think we see that there's a lot of differentiation in strategies by the subsector, whilst everyone is sort of fundamentally having to ask the question, you know, do I design it right? What's appropriate for the use phase, and then what happens at the end of life as well. And I guess that, you know, the final thought I'll leave you with just from our survey is that when we asked companies about the prevalence of these strategies, and we asked supply chain executives about adoption of circularity, about half said that their businesses were active on design. So in the selection of recycled content or designing for future recyclability, for example, which is not bad, but that then dropped to sort of 30 or 40% that were active in thinking about business models, you know, reuse or refurbishment, remanufacturing. And it dropped even further when we asked them about whether they were really going to change the commercial relationship with the customer to enable circularity, maybe only about 20% of companies. And so I think there's lots of untapped potential. You know, it's great to see that some companies are pioneering in this sector, but there's a lot more that could be done to really unleash circularity.
Well, that's rather insightful. But then hearing these drops, I would be curious, Giuseppe, from your experience and perspective, what you're doing at NL, what are the prospects that you see for improving the circularity of equipment linked to energy transitions, and what would you say are the key elements to accelerate this transition, and hopefully in the next survey boost the percentage of respondents who work on, for example, business models and other relevant strategies?
Thank you, Tamara. In general, I think that the positive things is that now there is an awareness about the importance of this topic. Now is clear the link with climate change. It's also clear that it's fundamental to make the value chain, the economic system also more resilient. So trying to create more local supply chain and avoid also geopolitical risk related to the raw materials. And what we are seeing now, not only awareness, but also that policymakers are working on that, financial institution, there are several standards on the topic. So I think the starting point is good. Obviously, it's fundamental to accelerate the implementation of all the strategy that are often complex and require, let me say, a medium term to be built. So the key element to achieve the right speed of this transition, I think it's the collaboration. Collaboration, first of all, through the actors of the value chain. So, for example, if I think about our project, we cannot implement them alone as energy utility. But for example, in the project of recycling, we also engaged with wind turbine manufacturer. We also connected with a waste operator and so on. So it's important that all the value chain works on that to improve this kind of circularity. So this is a very important point for us, and we also created an alliance, global alliance for sustainable energy, that is an alliance between producer, utility, that aim also to increase the circularity of the sector. So this is a collaboration, is first element, but another important element is to have a systemic approach. So it's important also a guidance on this from the institutions in order to develop a common strategy, for example, in Europe. So measure as the Circular Economy Action Plan, or bodies as the European Raw Material Alliance, or other mechanisms like the important project of common history in Europe that, for example, are implementing a circular value chain for batteries, are fundamental to achieve this transition, because it's important to change totally the ecosystem. So from raw material suppliers to producer, final user, and so on. So collaboration and strategic approach, I think, are two key elements to speed up this transition.
Yeah, I have to say I fully agree with that, and especially indeed also this collaboration, how necessary that is. Although I have to say that it's not easy, right? It sounds so easy to collaborate, but I would say that it's probably hard work. Or what is your experience there?
Yeah, it's an hard work to connect all these kind of partners. It's important to change the mindset from the classical relationship supplier-customer to a partner relationships. I think that the first important step is to increase the transparency of the information related to the material flow in the value chain, because this can help all the actors of the value chain, first of all, to better understand their impact, but it's fundamental also to set up target. So also in this way, this is the enabling part for me, and it's very good that the institution also with the instrument like the digital product passport or other disclosure standard want to push up that. Yeah, so this is I think the fundamental starting point.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing. And Harry, how is that from your experience? What do you see emerging as success factors for companies active in the circular economy space?
Yeah, look, very consistent with what Giuseppe is saying. When again back to our survey this spring, we asked about success factors and actually barriers, and interestingly, the same thing came top. So the top barrier was a lack of ecosystem, but the top success factor was having built an ecosystem and having the right partnerships in place. And I think it's sort of interesting, you see both sides of that. I think clearly it's very difficult to close a circle yourself as any one company, because typically you're playing just one part in a value chain of raw materials, production of the products, sale, end of life, etc. And so to actually get many of these cycles working, you tend to need upstream and downstream partners. And so getting those in place and getting the incentives aligned is really, really critical. And so I think this approach to building alliances or bringing stakeholders together that Giuseppe talked about is absolutely critical. So that's definitely a big one. Other factors we see is that that's not just about outside the organization. So a second barrier and success factor that came up a lot was actually about collaboration within the organization and getting the R&D team to think about circularity, the supply chain and manufacturing team to then implement it, if you like, and then the sales and marketing team to talk about it consistently with customers. Getting all parts of the organization to work together is challenging. We see that quite often that's because the benefit, if you like, might be seen in the proposition to the customer, but the cost needs to be taken by supply chain. And so getting different parts of the company to work together on the overall P&L is really key. And then the other sort of success factor that comes up a lot with clients is around data. It's hard to drive circularity unless you have high quality data in many different places, right? So you need data on the origin of materials. You need to go back to your suppliers and say, what's the share of recycled content? Where's this coming from? Many suppliers are not equipped maybe to provide that data right now, or it's challenging. So data upstream, you need data about how the materials are flowing through your own operations, and then you need downstream data, ideally, on the product in use. Where does the product end up? And so fixing the data value chain for circularity, I think, is a really critical topic to getting the value. You know, if you want to do predictive maintenance, or you want to think about the retained value of a piece of equipment whilst it's in use, you need to have monitoring and extraction of data back from it. And of course, that will get you into a discussion with your customers about who controls that data, who has the rights to it, what use can they make of it, which is why you need collaboration and actually to be upfront about the topic as well, because otherwise you'll run into some challenges. So getting those things right is really key. I think the final thing then is maybe a bit about just selling the benefits. So, you know, it's sometimes complicated to sell a circular proposition. You know, in an old world, you just make a product and you sell it. And now maybe you make a product, but it comes with commitments to preventative maintenance, or it comes with commitments around refurbishment, remanufacturing at some point in its life cycle, or maybe take back. If it's, you know, a battery, maybe you want to take it back at the end of its life. So you have a much longer period of involvement with your customer potentially, and a different set of economics. And that can be a win-win, but it can also be like a barrier to the sales process, because it's a more complicated selling job. It's more complicated for your customer to buy your product. They need to think about the lock-in, they need to think about the services over the next several years. They need to think, is that a fair price for all of that additional value? And so I think that really making that proposition clear and attractive is absolutely key. What you do see is quite a lot of the big engineering firms coming up with labeling schemes and ways to try and explain the benefit, both commercially and from an environmental perspective. So you've got things like the, you know, Eco Solutions label, I think it's called from ABB, or Green Premium, I think, from Schneider. There's lots of these different badges out there, and I think it's all an attempt to you know, explain the benefits of circularity and sustainability, to clarify the customer proposition and enable that discussion. But for sure, that has not been, you know, fully cracked yet, because we don't see as much uptake as we might like.
Okay, and Giuseppe, do you recognize that indeed? Like some of the points made, that it's not going as quickly as we.
Yeah, I fully agree with this kind of points, and data are fundamental for me, because to implement all the circular models in the different phases is the key element. And for this, it's complex. I agree that it's one of the challenges, especially because the value chain, there are different tiers. So it's also for our suppliers, it's complex for them to get information from their suppliers, because the value chain is very long. On this, what can I share is our approach, that is a gradual approach to get this kind of information. So we ask this to our supplier at the beginning. We reward them, the supplier that are able to give us this kind of information. So maybe this can be a way to improve the overall transparency of this kind. Then when let me say the data flow is mature, then this be a requirement, so can be mandatory. But at the beginning, it's very complex to ask as mandatory this kind of information, but you need a more gradual approach. And another point that I think it's very important, yeah, it's related to the relation and the business model that related to the customer and supplier. Yeah, this can be a very important game changer. I agree that sometimes can be challenging to switch from a classical sales to a product as a service, but this can be also a key element to improve the overall circularity of the value chain. But it's challenging because this also require a very strong collaboration between the parties. But for sure is something important to explore and dive.
Yeah,
Maybe
exactly.
if I can just pick up on a couple of things Giuseppe was saying about data and make a link back to an earlier comment about the benefits of circularity from a sustainability perspective. Right now, we see that one of the biggest drivers of this debate is Scope 3 carbon emissions. So many companies are grappling with how to decarbonize upstream. And if you're making equipment and you're using a lot of metals in particular in your product, then the simplest way, I would argue, to address your Scope 3 upstream emissions is to shift to recycled content. If we're thinking about aluminium, or we're thinking about battery metals, or thinking about steel, the recycled stream just has a dramatically lower carbon footprint than the virgin equivalent. And so that is, I think, a critical driver of a shift in supply chain, but it's also critical to get that information. You know, what share of your steel is coming from recycled sources? What share of your aluminium is from recycled sources? And I think that is going to be a huge opportunity, but also like a real battle over the next coming 5 or 10 years as people see the value of the recycled content and they all try and go after it. And I think that, you know, locking in that supply and thinking about the resilience and security of that that low carbon content is going to be really key as well. So it's a kind of data question, but it's also a question about partnering through the value chain to ensure you can be long-term successful.
Yeah, and because that for me also pops up the question, like how can you make sure that you then align incentives right across the value chain? Because yeah, in the end, I think from a sustainability perspective, we could argue that probably incentives are aligned as that narrative is picking up or these benefits are picking up. But then also on the commercial side, how do you make sure that it is, well, a win-win and everyone also sees the benefit and can capture the benefits, and that it doesn't get stuck maybe with one party in a value chain?
Yeah, that's a tricky one. Look, and I think these things will play out over time. If you look at recycled plastics right now, there's a real shortage actually of high quality recycled plastics, and so the price is rather high. So the recyclers are doing rather well, but the product manufacturers are struggling to get hold of that content. But you know, that supply demand balance should correct itself over time, and there should be a good business in recycling, and there should be some value for the people using that recycled content as well in terms of driving down emissions. So I think sometimes it's about trying to look through the short-term friction to the longer-term end game and maybe changing the dynamic, you know, moving to a longer-term offtake agreement rather than just buying on the spot market, for example. So there's different ways of I think structuring some of these relationships through the supply chain to ensure that they can work and you can look through some of the volatility that might arise.
I like that, indeed, shifting our perspective more to the longer term. So
it's
I
a
think
mix of factors, I think, yeah, because it's important, especially in the long term, evaluate the benefit in terms of mitigation of price risk. So it's not only the transaction of the moment, but yeah, the long term is fundamental also for this.
Yeah, thank you for that addition. Indeed, it's probably also depending who you speak with. That with one person you might focus on shifting the risks away, and with others that you might more focus on the benefits. Of really being able to understand the stakeholders that you speak to. I believe it's time to open up for questions from the audience. And so I see that the first question posed is, how is the percentage circularity for the wind turbine sector calculated? Which method have we followed? Now, in the analysis, we have used the CTI framework, which is the Circular Transition Indicators Framework, which is developed by Business for Business and hosted by the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. Now, basically what we have looked at in our analysis is what fraction of the material inflows that go into the wind turbines currently count as circular, and that can be either recycled content or regenerative content, and also what is the circular outflow share of the materials that reach their end of use. And this is a combination of whether it is recyclable and actually recycled. And then basically it becomes a, how do you say that, like a fraction. So it's the circular inflow plus circular outflow, and that then divided by 2. That's how we arrive at the circularity percentage. And I would definitely recommend to have a look at the CTI framework because it's one of the emerging frameworks being used by businesses to get a feel of how circular they are today. Then the second question, which is, how do you relate these circular economy strategies with concepts such as sufficiency? Now, I think that's a really great question. And Harry, would you want to have a go first?
I can have a stab at it, Tamara. It's quite a philosophical question, so let's have a go at it. Look, I think there's a couple of things there. In the narrow sense, then there's a very strong synergy between circularity and being frugal and efficient in the use of resources, right? So there's often opportunities for lightweighting and for better design of products, which I guess is aligned with the concept of sufficiency in some ways, and that's an important part of circularity. I guess the bigger picture question there maybe is many of the challenges we face in society are a function of consumption and growth, and that's why we have high emissions. It's why we face many of the challenges we do today, and so I think the interesting thing about circularity is that rather than solving that problem by saying we need to depress consumption and we need to restrict ourselves and sort of just aim for sufficiency, which is not a terribly exciting vision of the world. What circularity says is, let's break the link between resource consumption and output. Let's make better use of resources by keeping them in circulation. And if we can do that, we can then fulfill society's needs, but without such a destructive and extractive impact on the planet. And so I think in some ways, circularity is a slightly more optimistic vision of the future than one of mere sufficiency. I mean, sufficiency is great, but actually what we're saying is, if you adopt circularity and you can make better use of scarce resources and you can keep them in circulation and you can preserve their value, then we can actually deliver the output and the services that we need as humans, and we can do it in a way that is much more responsible. So I think sufficiency is sort of a related concept, but in some ways we're trying to build a future that is bigger and brighter than that with the circular economy. Now, clearly we've got a long way to go on that, and we need to go faster, but I think that potential is there.
Well, I think you had a very good go at this indeed philosophical question. Giuseppe, would you like to add anything to that?
I think that it's important material by material to evaluate also this dimension because you also have impact, for example, on price and so on. So for material that have this issue, it's important also to evaluate alternative solutions. So not only lightweighting, but also the possibility to substitute totally, for example, for lithium and this kind of material of battery, also cobalt, this kind of material, also evaluate alternative mechanism of storage that can also reduce or substitute for some application of this material. So this can be a useful part to innovate.
Good. Thank you for that. I see that another question has come in, which is, if in the current assessment, the social impact of cascading industrial assets to developing countries is taken into consideration, and how we can accelerate their transition and the knowledge transfer if we place remanufacturing centers there? Well, that's an excellent question. However, as part of this study, we have not specifically looked at the social impacts. However, that doesn't mean that we can perhaps touch upon that. So I'm not sure, Giuseppe or Harry, if one of you has an initial response when it comes to how should we deal with this, with the social impacts of circular economy.
Look, a couple of thoughts. I don't have a great answer there, but I've looked at this actually in a couple of sectors in the past. So, for example, if you look at trucks and buses, then a lot of trucks, once they've sort of maybe reached an end of their operating life in Europe, and with emission standards going up, they may then be exported to other parts of the world, and obviously they can continue in service and provide a useful service there. So that's potentially a good thing socially, and it's potentially a good thing for knowledge transfer, as the question raises. Although it also gives some questions, because if we're going to decarbonize, then we don't want lots of dirty diesels driving around for the next 40 years. We want to actually accelerate the transition to electric vehicles quicker, not just in Europe, but around the world. So I think we need to be quite cautious around where do we want to actually leapfrog to the new technology versus where do we want to cascade aging assets into other countries. So I think that's quite a complicated topic that's going to vary product by product. And I think it's part of a wider debate actually that was happening at COP27, and we're seeing a lot right now, which is this question of the just transition. You know, as we move to cleaner technologies, how do we ensure that society is benefited as a whole, and we don't get people who are left behind in that transition because they can't afford the newer, cleaner, more sustainable variation of the technology, whatever it is. So I don't have all the answers there, but I think it's a great watch out, and it's an important point to keep in mind as you think about individual items or sectors of the economy, for sure.
No, I fully agree, and I'm going to use this opportunity to also point our audience towards our Circular Jobs initiative, which specifically looks at the social side of this transition. Now we have room for one more question that I'm going to point towards you, Giuseppe, which is, the barriers to using recycled materials include regulations and standards, such as with steel. How can companies go ahead and work around these barriers? Or do we have to wait for regulation to catch up?
Yeah, it's an important issue because especially for us in the energy sector, in every case, there is an homologation phase in order to understand if this percentage of recycled material can guarantee the technical performance needed. So in some way, I think an approval step to include this kind of material according to the performance is necessary, but for sure there is a lot of space to speed up this process. So what it's important that the regulation is first of all is there is a common regulation across the different countries that can that makes simpler to speed up this phase, and there are some areas where there is still a lack of regulation, and that it's important to develop there. So in our case, we often through our institutional affairs, we engage also with policymakers when there are this kind of issue. But it's fundamental on this, but also in the end of waste part of the legislation, to review some and make more simpler the process.
Thank you for sharing this. I think there's no more room for questions. With that, I'm going to thank you very much for sharing your insights, and I'm going to move into a wrap up of what we've covered in the past hour. So we've explored what circularity strategies can be applied in the very broad machinery and equipment industry, having used the examples of wind turbines. And if you will read through the report, you will also find more business model related examples based on industrial water pumps. Now, what we have learned from our panelists is that there are a number of things that are crucial as we want to move this industry forward towards circularity, including the need for collaboration, which is both across the value chain as within an organization. So how can we learn to align our incentives and build a coherent story? But also the important role of data, so that we can measure exactly where we are and that we can also build more transparency across the value chain, but also acknowledging that this is a challenge, especially in this industry where value chains often are very long and complex. Again, underlining the importance of collaboration. Now, I think what I'm gonna do now is point you towards where you can actually download the reports. And I believe that that link has been shared in the chat. So please, we invite you all, click on the link, download the report, read it, engage with us so that we can start talking about the challenges that we face, but more importantly, shift towards the many circular solutions that are out there. I believe that was all there is to share. Again, thank you very much for joining us, Giuseppe and Harry, and also to you, our audience, even though I can't see you, very happy that you're there, and thank you for sharing your provocative questions with us. I'm going to close the webinar and wish you all a very nice day.